being here. I know it's a very busy day. We're going to be very brief. We will introduce to you. It's my honor, actually, to welcome the President of the General Assembly, Ms. María, Fernanda Espinosa, and the Director General of ILO, Mr. Ryder, to our press conference today. We know it's a very busy day. Everybody's very busy, so we would like to start without further ado. So, Madam President, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour. Buenas tardes. Thank you for being here. I know it has been a very, very busy day for all of you. We have a full house today, and I know that you're also following the Security Council developments. But, you know, development, the 2030 agenda, and the future of work is also of extreme relevance. We just saw our colleagues from UNFPA to present the new World Population Report, which is also extremely important. I would like to start, of course, by thanking the Director General of ILO, my good friend Ryder, for his presence. Welcome to New York. I really would like to take this opportunity to congratulate him and his team for his leadership in general and in particular in this very important year, which is the 100th anniversary of the ILO. I think that we all should commend ILO for being the vanguard of social justice and for promoting sustainable development. I think that when we look at the history of the ILO, this morning I mentioned 180 conventions that have made the life of workers around the world much better, but of course we still have enormous challenges ahead of us. ILO is about ensuring equality and social justice for all people, to empower women, youth, indigenous peoples, persons with disabilities. As you know, this year we adopted a resolution at the General Assembly to commemorate the 100th anniversary of ILO, to celebrate also a very thorough and comprehensive report this year, which is the report on the future of work and the excellent work of the International Commission that is teaching us also a way forward. So it's extremely important. We know that when we adopted the 2030 Agenda in 2015, we agreed to create 600 million new jobs for 2030. And I think we are a little bit behind of our promise. This means that we should create 40 million new jobs every year, and the majority of these jobs are for the young people, for youth, for the younger generations. That's why this morning, in the opening of the commemoration, we had a very strong young voice to tell us what they are expecting the world to do for them, but what is also their share and their responsibility. So I think that we are still witnessing gender disparities. I have come here to you several times to say that we still have a 20% gap between, salary gap between men and women, that we still have more than 80% of the persons with disability that are jobless, that we still have and witness the modern forms of slavery, child labor, and other unacceptable situations that we need to tackle. But we need to also look at the future. I think we have to acknowledge the 100 years of contributions of ILO to work towards social justice, improvement of quality of life of workers around the world. That is undeniable. The very profuse, I don't know if that word exists in English, establishment or norm setting to regulate the relationship between workers, employers, and governments. So I think that we owe a great deal to the ILO. It is a privilege to have Ryder among us. The commemoration will take place for the entire year, entire day. It has taken place the entire year, but today here in the House, please, join us for the two thematic roundtables. We have about 10 ministers in-house, a prime minister also, interactive panels that are, the expression of the diversity of regions, of ages, and of backgrounds as well. So follow us today. We are going to a luncheon, working luncheon, also to continue the conversation. The idea is that the outcome of this commemoration and the substantive outcome would feed into the HLPF in July, which is going to assess SDG number 8, but also to feed and to inform the June conference, labor conference, which is going to be a very important one, the 100th anniversary ILO conference in Geneva. And after that, of course, to feed into the SDG summit in September. So we will produce a summary to really contribute to the discussions on decent work and the future of work. So without further ado, I would love to give the floor to Mr. Guy Ryder. He's our visitor, so I think that we are all very interested in listening to him because you see a lot of me here in New York. So welcome once again, Director General of ILO.
Well, thank you very much, President. The first thing I want to do is to thank you. Thank you for convening the special session of the General Assembly to mark the ILO's centenary today. It's a great honour for us, and we thank you. I think there is both a sort of a tinge of history in the air today at the General Assembly. The ILO was founded 100 years ago, actually tomorrow. It is the oldest part of the multilateral system by a considerable distance. It is the only surviving part of the old League of Nations. We've survived 100 years through thick and thin. I could talk at great length about that history, but I don't think you want me to. I think what is important is that we draw on that history, we learn from that history to see where we're going next. And in our centenary year, as the President has said, we're focused very, very much on the future of work. And I think if you look at the world today and the politics of our world, one thing I think is stimulating a great deal of uncertainty, hopes for some, but a great uncertainty, and that is, what is the future of work going to look like? Is there going to be work for people in the future? And if so, under what conditions will people be working? We felt it therefore appropriate in this period of transformative change to focus on the future of work, and we did so very cognizant of the fact that in the 2030 agenda, the international community has already set out one of its objectives for the future of work, which is that it should be a future of work with full employment and decent work for all, and we're working towards that objective. That said, we are not on track, if we're brutally honest, President, on SDG 8, that is the SDG which refers to full employment and decent work for all. We know that there are still in excess of 170 million people without work in the world today. We know that youth levels of unemployment are 2 to 3 times higher than general levels of unemployment. And if you look to the qualitative aspect of jobs in the world, we know that many people are working, up to in the middle and low-income countries, 25–30% of workers, they're working and they're still living in poverty, which makes it clear that the jobs that are available don't reach the minimum standards of decent work that allow people to live decently. And to throw one further statistic in, just over 60% of the global workforce is working in conditions of informality, which poses another set of problems. Many other things I could quote to you. The gender pay gap, still in excess of 20% around the world, 152 million child workers, 40 million people in modern slavery. We have a long way to go. 100 years of ILO work has made a very significant difference to the world of work we have today. Had the ILO not existed, our world of work would look different, and it would not be where it is, not as good as it is today. But we are acutely conscious of the challenges ahead, which is why we have commissioned at the ILO Global Commission on the Future of Work, which reported in January, a report co-presented by the Prime Minister of Sweden and the President of South Africa, That report, which I think speaks very clearly to the 2030 agenda, and particularly the realization of SDG 8, will go to the Ilo Centenary Conference, which convenes in June in Geneva. It's a conference which will be, as the President has indicated, of the greatest importance. One of the objectives of that conference, perhaps the principal one, is the adoption of a declaration on the future of work, a centenary declaration. Our ambition is that would stand in comparison to the historic declarations which have marked the history of the ILO over the years, particularly the Declaration of Philadelphia, the great 1944 declaration, and will give us in the ILO a direction moving forward, and also sharpen and I think consolidate our very strong convergence and contribution to the realization of the 2030 agenda. And so I think this is a year, the June conference of the ILO, the HLPF in July, the summit coming up in September, when we think we have a lot of opportunity, but also very heavy responsibility to take forward an agenda which is of extraordinary importance for us all. Those are a few of the comments I'd like to make. And once again, President, I want to thank you for the occasion of today and for having made decent work one of the priorities of your mandate and your presidency. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Director General Mr. Ryder, Madam President, Mrs. Espinosa. Now we're going to open the floor for questions, and I will start here with Evelyn. Evelyn, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Evelyn Leopold, I welcome you on behalf of the UN Correspondents Association. I have a couple of questions. First of all, what kind of an impact can the ILO have or had on this enormous flow of migrants? And that includes the future. And secondly, I didn't quite understand what the new declaration was supposed to be. If you can elaborate on that.
Well, the ILO has an historic mandate in respect of migrant workers. It's from the beginning. It's in our constitution from 1919. And of course, we are now working in a new, as of this year, working in a new context of the multilateral system, post-adoption of the Global Compact on Migration. The ILO's work has been very clear. It is particularly focused on a rights approach to migration. If there's one responsibility that the ILO has above all others, it is to ensure that migration takes place on terms which are respectful of the rights of migrant workers. And we have a normative framework for that. And I think, the underlying fundamental point in that regard is the principle of equal treatment. It's a basic question of rights and equity. There is no reason why a migrant worker should be subject to inferior regimes of legislation or work for lesser conditions than local workers. I mean, it's a point of principle. But there's also a secondary point which I think is fundamentally important. We're dealing with migration issues in an atmosphere of considerable toxicity in many of our, is that an appropriate word? I don't know, in many of our countries. And there is a fear, and I detect it in the work that we do, from local workers that somehow migration will be used to undermine existing terms and conditions is somehow a threat. And the way to diffuse and disarm that reaction, that negative reaction to migration, is to ensure, not just in theory, but in practice, which is more difficult, that principle of equal treatment. Because if that is effective, that danger of a lowering of standards or an undermining of terms of condition of employment is neutralized. So those are our basic responsibilities. We'll be working very hard in the new UN Migration Network, which is one of the consequences of the Marrakesh Global Compact. Because I do think the other thing we have to do in the UN is work much better together on migration issues. It has been one area where silos have been particularly marked in the past, in my opinion. The new declaration, I'm not quite sure what it's going to do because it hasn't been adopted yet, but the idea, at least, is to set out in these moments of extraordinary change, and I say they generate enormous uncertainty about the future of work, some basic principles of what we want the future of work to look like, what sorts of basic ideas we want that future to conform to, pull out some of the basic issues that we have to address and move forward. And we've got some building blocks already for that process. From the report of the Global Commission to which I have referred, which has 10 very straightforward recommendations about what the future of work should look like. It starts with the idea of a right, an entitlement to lifelong learning for all working people. And it goes on to talk about a transformative agenda for equality at work. It's a little bit unfortunate 100 years later, after having pronounced the principle of equal pay for work of equal value. It's there from 1919. We're still some way away from that, isn't it? So my view on that one is it's no good just doing the same stuff. You know, we can't play the same music and turn the volume up a bit. We've got to do new things, play a few new tunes, and there's much more.
Thank you very much. You're here. Masood, go ahead.
Thank you. Excellency, I'd like to know why is it the tech giant South Korea is a holdout, and why is it still not signed on all the conventions as yet? Do you have anything to say about that? And that EU is about to put more pressure on it to sign on it.
I don't want to say we're putting pressure on South Korea. Just for the information of colleagues, South Korea is not party, has not ratified, as the question indicates, some of the fundamental rights conventions of the ILO, in particular those that relate to the rights of trade unions to form, to organize and to bargain collectively. It's been a long story since South Korea became a member of the ILO. I was in Korea last year, met with President Moon, and he has given firm commitments to work for the ratification of these conventions, and I have no reason to doubt his firm intentions to do so. The political dynamics in his country, of course, are not the easiest in this regard, but we are working with the government and with the employers and workers of South Korea to bring about these ratifications. I have to say the history of industrial relations in Korea is generally quite a volatile history of practice of industrial relations, but we're hopeful. And this is aligned with the overall objective of the International Labour Organization, which is for universal ratification of what we call our fundamental rights conventions, that small package of conventions which identify and protect human rights at work.
So what you're saying is that ratification is still going to take some time, and that the pressure from EU might work towards that end?
I don't think the pressure, I use your word, not mine, from the EU is going to be decisive in this question. It could happen quickly. It might take some time. I'm really not in a position to give you a very clear answer in that regard, but I am very clear, and this is the case more today than it has been in South Korea in recent years, that there is clear government interest and intent to move towards ratification. And I find this encouraging. I repeat, I can't say when this will come to fruition, but I'm hopeful that we are closer to the target than we have been, at least in my experience in that country.
I have you, and then afterwards.
All right. About the problem of unemployment, it seems to me that there is also a problem of people who are in employment and in poverty. Now, what are the recommendations of the ILO, and what is the ILO opinion about the policies of certain industrial countries which seems to lead to impoverishment of the middle class?
There's a few questions packaged together in that question very skillfully, but let me say straight away that we are very concerned about the phenomenon of working poverty. That is to say, people who are working full-time but remain in poverty. This is why the ILO talks not just about full employment, but about decent work. We want work that reaches a certain level of quality. So what do we propose? Well, a very contemporary notion, but again is 100 years old, is a notion of an adequate living wage. It's in the ILO Constitution of 1919. This basic thought that if you're at work and you're working full-time, you should have an adequate living wage. In a sense, it's a redefinition of the question that you put, because the question then becomes, how do you get that living wage? One of the things that the ILO's Global Commission on the Future of Work proposes is the establishment of what it refers to as a universal labour guarantee. This is to say, a minimum guarantee of terms and conditions that would apply to all workers in all working situations. And that includes a package of issues which are 100 years old in the ILO. So it's about a living wage. It's about a definition of a maximum working hours. It's about health and safety at work. Can I remind you that 2.7 million people die every year because of the work that they do? Most of it's disease, not accidents. 2.7 million people die because of their work. And of course, the issue of gender equality. We need, and I hope our declaration will do it, to establish these basic universal guarantees as an aspirational objective of international and national policy. And then, this is exactly what the ILO has done through its history, get to work on engineering our labour markets so that we can move towards those aspirations. This is very much the business we're into. This is not just for the future. We're doing it every day. We're doing it every day in our member states. It's about formalising the informal economy. It's about improving productivity. It's about ensuring that collective bargaining works effectively. It's about looking with our member states at the conditions of workplaces and make sure they are neither lethal nor dangerous nor unhealthy. It's part of our work, and it has to converge around elevating the conditions of work to those levels which are already the vision of the founders of the ILO 100 years ago.
Thank you very much. Arthur, go ahead, and we have to move afterwards. Please.
Hello. Yes, it's a question for both of you, actually. Just bearing in mind that it's obviously an anniversary of 100 years, but you're seeking to look ahead on the future of work and touching on a few of the issues that you yourself have highlighted. Given that the two of the very significant challenges to employment in 2019 are, and beyond, are automation of work, but secondly, the autonomy of the worker, and in particular I'm thinking about the so-called gig economy here, and in many ways the kind of like shadow economy of the black labour market, or whether it's an Uber driver or whatever. These are not traditional forms of employment, more a self-employment, autonomous worker. Given that the ILO's history is on principles such as collective bargaining, which you've just cited yourself, do you see this changing labour market as a threat or an opportunity to organisations such as yourself? And given that you've said the ILO is the last surviving part of the League of Nations, how can you endear yourself and make yourself increasingly relevant to the worker of 2019?
Yes, I'm very interested in listening to you. Perhaps I will have, here we have the expert, and perhaps more from a political stand, I can perhaps add a few thoughts at the end.
Well, there's enough issues in that question for a seminar. I don't know how long we would have, so I won't subject you to a seminar. Can I just say there's one thing that worries me in the debate on the future of work, and it's the danger, I'll use the slogan I use, of technological determinism, the notion that technology is going to determine everything and the future of work will be built in the image of technology. I think that's wrong. I think it's wrong because it's not, the world is not like that, and the future of work basically depends on policy decisions. Now, of course, technology will come into play, but the real question is how are we going to handle technology? Uber is a great example. Uber is being, is causing a headache to policymakers and legislators and judges in labour tribunals all over the world. We have some fundamental decisions to make about that. I think the best comment I heard about the gig economy and what it might look like came from Chancellor Merkel when she said, the technologies which drive the gig economy can open up extraordinary opportunities to make the world of work better. Greater choice, greater freedom, greater ability to balance private life and work. But it could also produce a 21st century generation of digital day laborers. We could have the utopian or the dystopian, and it depends entirely on the policies that we adopt.
Madam President?
I would like just to echo, sometimes, and we have numbers and figures, plenty of them, but if you look at the Future of Jobs report of the World Economic Forum, just looking at numbers, they're basically, they state that 75 million jobs may be displaced and change the current division of labor between humans and machines, but they also state that 133 million new roles and new jobs may emerge because of the so-called Fourth Industrial Revolution. And I think the key is what Director General Ryder has just mentioned. It is about right policy choices, and it is about proper governance mechanism. I think that we need to really make an effort to put in place proper governance mechanisms for the new technologies, but also to redirect our training and capability, especially for the younger generations. It's the way we're trained and how we prepare for this changing relationship between society, humans, and machines. So I think that it is about policy choices and proper governance in place.
And I understand the next question. Also for Mrs. Espinosa, please go ahead.
Yeah. Actually, you have partly answered my question, but I still will ask: in what sort of countries has technological transformation affected the workers the most? So, what will and can ILO do to protect those affected? We know of course, we are expecting a new wave, or technological wave. During the first industrial revolution era, we know a lot of workers lost their jobs. What can we do in this during this wave? Thanks.
I think that's also a question for our expert. But in general terms, I think that the issue of rights and dignity are at the core. I'm not an expert, but on work issues, but it's pretty obvious. And I think that just looking at the Sustainable Development Goals and the commitments we have, I think that's a good reference point. And also, I would like to join my voice for the concern of, and I think that one of you mentioned the concern for the working poor. Also, it's not only about displacement of jobs because of new technologies. It is about, for me, one of the major challenges, just out of common sense as a politician, is number one, the working poor, the ones that live with less than $1.90 per day. What is going to happen with them in terms of quality of their jobs, and looking at the future as something to look forward to. And the second major challenge perhaps, and you can even contradict me, but for me, it's the sustainability of the social security architecture in the long run. I think that's one of the very, very critical issues. And here, again, I am speaking, more as a politician, and the way I see paths going, especially in my own region, in Latin America, which remains one of the most, unequal, uneven regions of the world. And the relationship between capital and labor in Latin America is not very promising, either. So there is a lot of work to do, but I'm sure that you have more to say.
Well, let me give you a slightly provocative or counterintuitive answer to your direct question. The countries that will be the worst affected by new technologies are the ones that get left out. They'll be the countries which the new technologies never get to. because they're going to fall behind. They're going to be marginalized. Their economic growth and competitiveness and living standards will suffer. Somewhat counterintuitive. So, and the question then is, for those countries where the employment impact of new technologies are the greatest, how do you manage that? Now, it's not about, in my view at least, stopping technological innovation or trying to break it. It's about the management of these processes. And here, I think it's helpful to think in, not in terms of the wholesale destruction of jobs or the old Schumpeter idea of creative destruction. It's about how we get people from where they are today into the jobs of the future. And as the President referred to earlier on, it's about training and skills acquisition, and we make a big play for lifelong learning being a right, as I've said before. But it's also about planning. It's also about national planning. Don't just leave this to the forces of the market to resolve, because if you do that, you're probably not going to do what we want to do. You're not going to get this human-centered approach to what I will call the great transition to the new world of work, which will be technologically driven. And it will bring with us, and I didn't really answer the previous questioner's point on this, it's not only a quantitative approach to technology and employment, it's about how technology, this fourth industrial revolution, which is unique, it's what makes it different from the previous three, enables work to be undertaken in new ways, new types of work, be it the gig economy, be it new independent work. These are issues which, and I didn't answer that question, are certainly challenges to the International Labour Organization, to the sort of traditional categories and concepts in which we think of work, because they don't fit very well any longer. And just to echo the other point which the President made, social protection in all of this is fundamentally important. It is wrong to believe that strong social protection systems somehow are an inhibitor to change and adaptation. They facilitate change and adaptation. It's an investment in change, not an obstacle to change. And we really have to get that message across, because sometimes it's not appreciated.
Madam President.
No final remarks, just to say that I really thank you for your presence here today. I know how challenging your schedule is today. Thank you for being here, for following the conversation on the future of work and SDG number 8. We will continue to work on this, and thank you once again, Director General, for coming to New York, for taking part of this commemoration, which is extremely important to put at the top of the agenda of sustainable development, the right to work and the right to decent work for all. So
Thank you.
very much.
And that concludes our joint press conference. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam President, Ms. María Fernanda Espinosa, also Director General, Mr. Guy Ryder, and our UNTV colleagues, and also our interpreters that who helped us today. Thank you very much. I'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks to the interpreters again.